Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History. I'm Daz, and this is the American Civil War and UK History podcast. This presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel and a podcast from wherever you get your podcasts from. And remember, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now TikTok, because, you know, you've got to be on TikTok these days. I'm also part of the Unfiltered Historian team. You will find all relevant links in the description below. Today's discussion is about the stories of the USCT, which is the United States Colored Troops. And joining me is historian, reenactor, and also appeared on American Battlefields Trust and Teedham presentations 2 years in a row, and also gave up his time to give me a tour of Washington, D.C. in December, along with Jesse Walensky. It's Bryan Cheeseboro. Welcome, Bryan.
Good evening, Darren. It's great to be with you tonight.
And so we are going to discuss the USCT. But firstly, Bryan, please tell us how you got into the American Civil
War. Well, I just have always been interested in history ever since I was a kid, ever since I can remember. I don't really have any starting point on my interest, fascination, love, enthusiasm, or whatever, enthusiasm of history. It's just always been there. Always been intrigued by that. And that's really specifically American history, I have to say. There's all kinds of histories to be interested in. But as far as the American Civil War, I just I'm really drawn to that because I really feel like that it is such a watershed moment, as they say, that so many of the questions of our national American life really kind of meet. They're kind of intersected in that history of the Civil War. Questions of freedom, questions of citizenship. I mean, who gets to be an American? Questions on what America is going to be as a country, and so many of those things, citizenship and so on, that really I feel come from that Civil War, and I think even actually more. I've heard people say that any understanding really has to be based on the Civil War, which is something Shelby Foote, the author, said. But I think really even more, and this is a whole nother program for a whole nother day. Reconstruction is probably something that really defines our country today, the years after the Civil War. So again, I just really feel that the American Civil War, and I guess really the Reconstruction era afterwards, are really moments that really shaped what America is today.
Okay, cool. So again, like I said, we're going to talk about the USCT. A quick overview. So in total, there were between 180,000 and 200,000 African Americans who served in the USCT. There were at least 166 regiments formed, and the USCT, were involved in 450 battles and engagements. And African Americans were allowed to join the US Navy before the war and at the beginning of the war, but not the army. So you could just explain a little bit about that, please, Bryan.
Well, that is interesting about, well, first of all, I guess I should say the Militia Act of 1792 was the specific order that barred Blacks from enlisting in the army. But certainly there are incidents, the War of 1812, there were Blacks who did serve as foot soldiers, I believe with perhaps militia units and such, more so than the United States regulars. But even with the Navy, there were some Blacks during those wars, like again, the War of 1812, who did serve in the Navy as sailors, I guess, really. But it wasn't until really the Civil War that really took off on a much grander scale. I think there were about 20,000 who served overall in the 4 years. At first only being given the rank of landsman, and then later seaman, the rating of seaman in the Navy. And you know, the thing of it is that the law, those laws, the Militia Act or whatever, really won't mean anything unless they're enforced. We have found some cases of some Blacks who served in white units before the United States Colored Troops was created. There was one man, for instance, William Henry Johnson, who served in the 2nd Connecticut, the 3-month 1861 2nd Connecticut, re-enlisted with the 8th Connecticut after the 3 months were over, and fought in was in the Roanoke campaign in February and March 1862 before he was discharged. Here's just one example of a Black man who served in a white regiment before the United States Colored Troops came along. So they're few and far between, but there were some instances.
Okay, thank you. So July 17, 1862 is a very important date. The Militia Act is brought in. What is their involvement during this period as well? So please explain that.
That is the repeal of the Militia Act. And that is when the Emancipation Proclamation hasn't happened yet. But you'll ask yourself, of course, what's going on, why this needs to be repealed at this point. All this time, as the Union Army has been moving south into Virginia, into Tennessee, into the southern states where troops are. I mean, where these troops are basically going into and occupying areas. There are enslaved people who are making their way to these Union armies. It's no longer a matter of the whole bound for Canaan land or whatever, bound for the North. Now the North is coming to the South. So you can read stories about how early on in the war, there were Union generals who all weren't on the same page. Some felt, okay, well, you're all free. I'll issue my own Emancipation Proclamation, which Lincoln wasn't ready for. Or some that said, no, you're not our problem. We're going to return you to where you came from. But by the summer of 1862, this changes. And it's decided then that there will be one direction to begin the process of enlisting Blacks as soldiers. And this is before the United States Colored Troops was created. So you have regiments like the 1st Kansas Colored, which come along. And this comes along also at a time, I should say, when I think this is the 3rd or 4th, I'm forgetting, major call for troops. This is in the summer of 1862. This is after battles like Shiloh, after the Peninsula Campaign, where there have been some heavy casualties. So this is where you may have heard the tune, "We Are Coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more." So this is at that time. And this is when regiments like the 1st Kansas Colored, which is considered the first Black regiment of the North, is created. This one stumped me once, because it's like, okay, what was the first Northern Black regiment? Well, my answer was, well, I guess in that case, it would be the 54th Massachusetts, although I knew that they weren't the first Black regiment per se overall, but the first Northern. And that was my answer. And it's like, well, no, actually, they were the 1st Kansas Colored. And then I have to remember, oh, yes, Kansas was a free state. That whole question had been settled before the war. And by 1861, it was entered as a free state. So not a border state, those states that remain loyal to the Union but have slavery. Kansas never did. So the first Black regiment from the North is this 1st Kansas Colored. And that is as a result of the one direction, if you will, of the Militia Act, of the repeal of that Militia Act of 1792.
Okay. And again, go back to the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. So this has a massive impact on the USCT, doesn't it? So just explain a little bit about that. Thank you.
Well, it has a massive impact on the USCT, but certainly a massive impact on the country, because now you have a declaration of freedom coming from not a general in the field, not just whoever. It's coming from the President of the United States. It's coming from the top. I really think there's a lot of, you'll find people who online want to say things like the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free a single slave, because it was basically applying to areas that some feel were no longer under federal United States control. That's whatever to me, because I think really the Emancipation Proclamation to me is that it's like an addendum to the Declaration of Independence. To me, both of these documents are on the same like parallel line, or on parallel lines with each other. If you could say, for instance, that if you want to argue, okay, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't mean anything because it didn't really free anyone. Well, I guess there's a point to that, because it obviously action has to be put to it to tell all enslaved people in all of the rebellious areas of the country at the time, the Confederate States, and all those places that the Confederacy claimed where there was slavery, that all of those people in that place are free. All you have to do is basically find your way to freedom. In other words, the Union Army, and you will be treated as a free person. You will not be returned to any enslaver and not be anything like that. You will be a free person. And I compare this going back to the Declaration of Independence. And I know I'm talking to someone from Britain, but the thing is that had it not been for United States victory during the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence wouldn't have meant anything either. It would just be a piece of paper. And so that's what I mean. These are declarations of freedom where action has to take place to win that independence, to gain that freedom, that of emancipation of slavery. And again, to continue. So this way, if an enslaved man wants to, or an enslaved family, if they want to come to a Union Army for freedom, none of them will be sent back. If the man enlists in the 1st Kansas Colored, or the 1st and 2nd Louisiana, the Native Guard, the Union Native Guard, originally some men who tried to enlist in the Confederacy were never really accepted as Confederate soldiers, no loss there. But anyway, if those people try to enlist in those regiments when it became a Yankee unit, the Native Guard in Louisiana, their families would not be turned away. So the Emancipation Proclamation is another stepping stone after the Militia Act of 1862 and the beginnings of Black regiments in that direction of adding the Black soldier to United States victory.
Okay. And another important date, and this one's really important. So the May the 22nd, 1863, another important date, General Order 143 is issued. Who is responsible for this, and how is the news received by the African Americans?
This comes from the War Department, and this is a document that creates the Bureau of Colored Troops. If you ask many people, name a Black regiment from the Civil War, most people would name the 54th Massachusetts. And they were actually created, contrary to what the movie shows. They were organized in the spring of 1863 That movie, for instance, shows Colonel Shaw, played by Matthew Broderick. He is spending Christmas time with the soldiers of the 54th. That did not happen in 1862. That did not happen. He didn't even know anything about that at the time. But they were created in March, and then a couple months later is when you have the creation of the Bureau of Colored Troops. And that is where most of these regiments were the USCT, United States Colored Troop regiments, or specifically United States Colored Infantry, United States Colored Light Artillery, Heavy Artillery, and Colored Cavalry units come from. And I believe the number of organizations as it's put is about 100, I think it's 186 or 168, but I believe it's 186. That's according to Dyer's Compendium. And that is basically different units, regiments, batteries, cavalry regiments, and whatever, created as part of this Bureau of Colored Troops. Regiments like the 1st Kansas Colored end up actually changing their designation to the 79th USCI, United States Colored Infantry. The 1st and 2nd South Carolina Colored become the 33rd and the 34th Colored Infantry units under this. But some places do keep their state designation, specifically the 54th Massachusetts mentioned, 55th Massachusetts as well, and then the 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry Regiment. The 3 regiments from Massachusetts all keep their state designation. 29th Connecticut keeps theirs. So that's the information about that creation of the Bureau of Colored Troops. And also that the Bureau announces that their selection of officers, that they're looking for white officers to command regiments. Contrary to what some think, these weren't the screw-ups, whatever. These were often men who were specially selected because they were looking for men who basically could treat Black men as soldiers. There were some racist officers, yes, definitely. And given the state of the 19th century, unfortunately, maybe even in some of the best circumstances, there were people that had some issues. But they had aptitude tests and such for men to vet out the best candidate, to get the best candidates to command Black soldiers. And by the way, some of the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, were also white men in the USCT.
Mm-hmm. And what follows this is a massive recruitment drive. Obviously, they're, like you said, at this stage of the war, you know, they're getting low on numbers again, so they need to bolster their ranks. So what goes into the recruitment, and how many take up the call to arms?
The ultimate number is, I just read this yesterday, in the USCT is over 200,000. 180,000 is sometimes mentioned, but it's actually over 200,000. I heard 212, but I won't say that many right now, but it's over 200,000. And that is does not include the 20,000 in the Navy. So these examples of recruitment posters are great that you have, because they're very typical of other regiments. Big bold letters, just desperate calls to take up arms. And these are all another thing where they're recruiting posters looking for volunteers. While most of the men who served in the Civil War, white, Black, or whatever, were volunteers, there were men, we could talk about it in a little bit, I guess, who were drafted, and some Black men were drafted. It wasn't just all volunteer. Some men also served as substitutes for other men. If a man was drafted, then he could either pay $300, or he could find someone to serve in his place for, I guess, less money than $300. And another case of substituting was also, I believe, if you had volunteered, decided you didn't want to serve anymore, the only way to get out at that point would be to find someone to fill in the rest of your service. The second from the left poster, they're showing the bounty available of $600 is a great offer on the bounty. I've never really seen it that high, with $350 up front. So most of the men were volunteers, but the USCT, last thing I want to say is, where Shelby Foote, I know in the Ken Burns documentary talked about the United States, the North, he believed fought the war with one hand tied behind its back. It didn't really need to use everything because it had so much of everything to defeat the North. That is not true. The North had to implement a lot of things that it didn't have at the beginning of the war to achieve United States victory. One of those elements was the Bureau of Colored Troops to create the United States Colored Troops, 186 organizations, different regiments to achieve United States victory, a big part of the war.
Mm-hmm. And can I just ask as well, what walks of life does some of these guys come from? Because they're not all enslaved, are they? You know, there's free men as well. So what kind of jobs are they doing before they join the army, some of these guys?
Well, during slavery, it's interesting. Slavery by many people is remembered as very just simply that all Black people did before 1865 was pick cotton in the South, and then that was it. And that's far from that. A lot of that was done, yes. Cotton was huge for the Southern states, particularly the lower South. But there was so much more that enslaved men did even. Many had skilled jobs. Some of their jobs in slavery were, skilled jobs to working in perhaps in a factory or things like that, or blacksmith or something, even as an enslaved person. But in the North, of course, there you have people who are free. And in the North, that's where the cities are. So you could have had men who there were a lot of barbers. That is one thing I do know for sure. But men who might have been tailors, men who might have been clerks, or other skilled jobs, glass blowers, iron workers. Some men worked in maritime. They were whalers. So there's just a lot of different positions that men did. There's a great outtake scene from the movie Glory. It's actually featured in the documentary, which you can find on YouTube, called The True Story of Glory Continues. And in that, there's a scene where Frederick Douglass in 1863 is doing a recruiting drive in Syracuse, New York. One man, fictional, I imagine, because the scene is probably actually technically fictional, but still based on real things that were done and real things Frederick Douglass did, where a man named Joseph Williams, he stands up and says, Mr. Douglass, my name is Joseph Williams. I have a family and a business. And I'm not giving that up, not to enlist, for the situation of to be paid less than white soldiers, to put myself in the danger of being captured and executed for, fighting in a blue uniform because the Confederacy doesn't accept me as a soldier, or being enslaved when perhaps he had never been enslaved at all. But anyway, I just found it interesting that it definitely depicts a real person in the regard of perhaps the character is not real, but in the regard of that there were Black business owners. I don't know how many, perhaps not many, I imagine, but Blacks who did own their own shops and such things. And these were real people, and some of them did enlist in the Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so part of the recruitment drive in 1864 comes something called the Hoax. So please explain a little bit about this.
This is these two photos, particularly the one on the left, have been made extremely famous by just by social media and the internet. The internet is a great place, and I've definitely gotten a lot from it and been able to do a lot with it. But at the same time, there are people, I guess, who have nothing better to do, or simply just don't have a very good understanding of history and how to understand historical fact. Some years ago, this person knows who they are, but I don't know. Saw the picture on the left. It is a picture of a group of soldiers. I can tell you for certain, without even knowing anything ahead of time, these are soldiers in the United States Army. And I would know that simply by the fact that the Confederacy never had any concrete plan. If it did, it was until it was way too late to enlist Blacks as soldiers in the Army. And that wasn't until March of 1865. I know enough about photography in the Confederacy that they really weren't even taking a lot of pictures of soldiers in 1865 because pretty much every man that could walk, they needed in the field. So the picture on the left was taken, I think, sometime perhaps 1863 or 1864, and that is the heart of the recruitment and organization of Black regiments. That year and a half, basically. It's taken in Philadelphia. You can tell this by the fact that their equipment, that they have their greatcoats on, and they would be a sky blue color, light blue, and their caps, the forage caps, are dark blue to match the sack coat of the frock coat of their uniform. And the officer on the left there is a Union officer. You can tell by his, even the black and white, tell by his dress that he is wearing the single-breasted frock coat, a junior officer, I guess perhaps a captain commanding this company of soldiers. Companies were supposed to be 100 men, but many actually took the field with far less. So what someone did, and this is the basis of the picture on the right, where it's actually, this is typical what they would do, take a photograph or a sketch and turn it into a lithograph. Looks like a painting or something like that, but use it as the basis of a lithograph. Now they added the tent in the background, the flag, the stars, the stripes, the tree, and everything. And even the drummer boy was added. I guess he was in school and couldn't stand for the photo or something. But he was added. And it was created into this great poster, Come and Join Us, Brothers. And this is out of Philadelphia. But what someone decided to do instead was to take that first photo. And I don't know if you have it in your slides, but right in the open space in front of their feet, to take a modern font that looked old and put in 1st Louisiana Native Guard, 1861, trying to claim that it was a Confederate regiment.
I've come across that picture actually, but I didn't put that one on there,
And it's a complete lie, and it's a complete lie. And I think it's really sad on somebody's part they took the time to do this. And I think another thing, just the last thing to say, that one of the interesting things to me about the whole, that tells me, that always reminds me that the Black Confederate mythology is just that, and mythology is, I see so often where I see some article or story talking about Black Confederates, and the pictures that they use are obviously pictures of Yankee Black USCT or whatever soldiers. I've seen the storming Fort Wagner engraving, much like the one picture on the right, where Shaw and his men are going up, and Shaw is reeling back, very romantic image, kind of at the top of this. And I've seen that picture in an article on Black Confederates, and that's the last thing that they were. So it's really kind of sad, I think, that someone's so desperate to, and people were fooled by this. That's the saddest part, because it's not true. It's just the whole Black Confederate thing you're barking up the wrong tree. If you're really that interested in Black men in the Civil War, if you're really that interested in them as soldiers, the story is in the United States colored troops. If you're neo-Confederate, I'm sorry, it's just not there for that purpose. I do believe that some Black people at some point fired person or whoever, maybe people, maybe a few people, I don't know, fired a gun or guns at Yankee soldiers. But it's not any of this image that you see in front of you. It's not recruitment, it's not enlistment, it's not organization. There's no CSCT. And even a claim that well, Blacks fought integrated with whites, that denies like everything I know about American history. I'm sorry, it just does.
Yeah, one thing that's confused me about the lithograph type thing is why the hell have they put them in grey? What was that about?
Well, the lithograph, I'm not sure.
Or is that more of a modern one, maybe?
Well, no, I don't know that I've seen it in a blue. But I'm focused on the flag and I'm focused on the cause, and I'm focused on the fact that whatever their color they're wearing, candy apple red. Yeah. I know who they are, and I know what this cause is, and I know what it's about. It's not Confederate. So I think I may have seen where some Yankee greatcoats might have been some kind of gray color, but I don't know about that. But I know that these are Union soldiers. There's no second guessing on my part.
Yeah.
But that is a good question. I just don't really know the answer.
No. Okay, thanks for that. So let's move on to the actual USCT training. So what is their training going to be like? Some of these guys have never, picked up a rifle before. So what's that going to be like for them? And also, how are the coloured regiments looked upon by their counterparts? And are they treated differently? And does that change over time?
Well, this is another area that I guess means a lot to me. There's a lot of belief that Black soldiers got inferior uniforms, or they got inferior weapons, or they had gotten this or that. Again, Glory depicts some of that. Struggling to get shoes or whatever it is. That's an important movie, and that's I guess it's kind of a way to communicate this great idea of discrimination. But the actual reality is that I don't really think any of that's true. Where they had those kind of struggles. There weren't two different supply lines from the quartermaster's department to white soldiers and Black soldiers. There just weren't. Remember, again, this is recruiting the largest armies that the United States had seen to this point. The biggest difference with Black soldiers was the pay issue. Money talks, and money can communicate a lot of things. I can have the same musket as somebody else, and it can work just as well. And they got the same muskets that white soldiers did. Again, not two different supply lines for weapons or anything like that. But if I'm not getting paid enough, then I'm going to be struggling to support myself and support my family. There's a great letter from a soldier in the 6th United States Colored Troops, which I think, by the way, this might be this regiment in this image here that you posted. It's a Camp William Penn in Philadelphia, where the 6th came out of, or the 3rd came out of, and some other regiments. But anyway, and that is one of the, by the way, one of the most populated photos of the era of the Civil War period that I know of, where it features probably 500 soldiers in it or something. You can't tell who anybody is. But anyway, because it's so far away. But still, just many, many soldiers there. And I think even some of the barracks or whatever on the left, there's some people there too. So anyway, yeah, it was written by a soldier from the 6th United States Colored Infantry, where he writes about he was drafted, but his patriotism is to the freezing point because he isn't getting paid enough. His wife and children are suffering at home. And it's a big struggle and a strain on him and on his family. And all his enthusiasm, whatever he had of being a soldier, is gone. So that's enough. But, you know, white and black soldiers got the same uniforms, got the same shoes. Things could be defective, sure. But, and is it possible someone said, well, these are defective, I'll send these to the black soldiers? I guess, but I really haven't come across anything from anyone saying, you know, yeah, my uniform fell apart. The funny thing is where that does happen during the Civil War, but it's early on. It's in the first year of the war, where suddenly the army is huge. Suddenly you have to equip more men than you ever did before. Suddenly you need all these contractors and people to provide weapons and all kinds of stuff. And because contractors, like any time else, are trying to get as much money with as little effort, thinking the war's not going to last that long, supply uniforms and shoes that fall apart just like that. So long story short, on average, black troops during the Civil War were actually on average better equipped than white troops. The big issue was the pay. And that was not rectified until I think late summer of 1864, where they got back pay, as well as finally the $13 a month or whatever the pay would be.
And again, you know, of course, I mean, this is the middle of the war as well, isn't it? So every part of the Union Army is better supplied at this point, like you pointed out. So yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Like I said, the you could say corrupt or the shoddy or whatever it is, contractors by that point have been weeded out, and it really doesn't do any good to you know, purposely equip
no, of course not,
men with bad, you know. There's another story. Sorry to go off on a tangent.
That's all right, you go for it.
Well, we just came back from the Battle of Olustee reenactment in Florida last weekend. This time last weekend, we were headed on our way we spent the night in South Carolina, stayed and finished up the next day, President's Day holiday. But anyway, while we were there at Olustee, they always love for us to come down to be the presence of the black soldiers that were there, the 54th Massachusetts, the 8th United States Colored Infantry, and the I think 1st North Carolina Colored Infantry. I always kind of forget that last one. But the 8th is what I want to talk about, because with the 8th, the story, as I've been told when I was there in 2019 for the reenactment, by another USCT reenactor, that the 8th was sent into battle not even knowing how to fire their muskets. The truth is that it was only one company of that really didn't know how to fire their muskets. And I'm not sure if that company was even put in battle. It wouldn't do any good if they can't even know how to shoot until they get on the battlefield. But the rest of the regiment was better trained. I'm forgetting exactly when they came into organization, but there were other, again, white regiments during the war, which were organized, recruited, and then on the battlefield a couple weeks later. The 20th Maine, one of the most famous regiments of the Civil War, was organized in late August 1862 at Antietam a couple weeks later, although they weren't put into combat. 16th in Connecticut was organized around that same month. They were in combat. 130th Pennsylvania, they were in combat. All these regiments were only recruited just a few days before a major battle. And the same is certainly the case with the Confederacy, with their desperate need for men. Are you kidding? They the same thing, where very common during the Civil War to get men into uniform, and because of great need for soldiers by both sides, to put them in combat just days after they were recruited.
Now, can I just ask, what is the Confederate government's reaction to hearing coloured troop regiments, and also, eventually the Apache seeing them in the field.
Okay. Yeah, you did mention that earlier. I think it was as early as late 1862. I think it was General Orders 111. I think issued by the Confederate government. Where they it's that thing where they basically knew that that they were starting to recruit Black soldiers, and they would not treat Black soldiers as soldiers. I've read many things where Confederates did not call Black men who were soldiers soldiers. They couldn't even say that these men are soldiers of the United States Army. So they issue their order to say that any Black man caught in uniform could be put to death and not be treated as a prisoner of war. Before this, there was a prisoner exchange system where if 100 privates were captured on each side, they used to exchange 100 for 100. Or if you have a couple officers, maybe 10 privates for a lieutenant or something. But once you throw this monkey wrench of Black soldiers in a war where white Southerners are fighting for white supremacy, this Black soldier thing isn't going to work. It's not going to work to exchange 2 Black soldiers for 1 white soldier, because they know that that's 2 men who can fight. And just the indignant nature of exchanging a white man for a Black man is more than Johnny Reb could stand, as one person said when he saw Black soldiers at the Battle of the Crater for the first time. The sight of the N-word is what he used, in a blue uniform was more than Johnny Reb could stand. We felt as ugly as they looked, is what he said. The next day after that Union defeat, they did take some Black men as prisoners. And I think what they relented because they knew that the Lincoln government said that they would retaliate. You kill our soldiers, we will kill yours. Although there was some balking on that because, and I guess I could understand if it was a matter of, well, you could end up killing a Confederate soldier who had nothing to do with a Fort Pillow massacre or Poison Springs or something. Still, there were some Black men who ended up being prisoners. Some made it to Andersonville or other prison camps, but many times they were stripped of their uniforms because they just couldn't deal with them as being soldiers. I know of one case where I've heard of a case, I forget the soldier's name. He was recaptured by his enslaver. The enslaver dragged him all the way back to their farm or whatever it was. But a few miles away before they got to the farm, he purposely took the man's uniform off of him and I guess threw it away or whatever, because he didn't want others to know that he had, or these other enslaved people to know that he had actually fought as a soldier. So it's a hard fight for the Black soldier. So to answer your question, there were written orders from the Confederate government sanctioning the murder of Black troops who tried to fight, who tried to surrender. Happened at Lusty as well, like I mentioned, I was there, in Fort Pillow and the Crater. There were either the Lincoln government said that they would retaliate, but many times soldiers themselves, if Confederates tried to surrender to Black soldiers, they didn't accept their surrender either. The war is already ugly; it just gets ugly.
Yeah.
And many Confederate soldiers just could not deal with the presence of Black men in uniform and armed.
Okay, so let's move on to the actual, their involvement. So USCT, how were they used at the start of the war? Obviously, because like you said, in 1862, there are a few regiments about. But would you say their biggest involvement comes in 1864?
I would say that simply because the entire year is, I think, what I always call the year of the United States Colored Troops. It's a full 12-month year of recruiting, of battles. Of course, many battles happen, in the other times. Milliken's Bend in June 1863, Second Fort Wagner, Port Hudson, I think, is another. 1865 is Petersburg. And by that time, 1865, I think more and more battles are involving Black soldiers. You're seeing Black soldiers more and more. And the biggest thing, I think, and I'll get back to 1864 in a minute, the biggest thing I think is when the war ends, Lee surrenders and all, and effectively ends, many white regiments, it's about their time to end anyway. But Black regiments, which were recruited later, many of them again in 1864, still have a few years left on their enlistment. So I think it's interesting, had the war actually continued into the summer and the fall of 1865, you may have seen a majority Black Union Army. And you may have even seen a Confederate States Colored Troops. I wouldn't rule it out, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
But 1864 really was, I think, a very pivotal year where you had many different engagements, one of them being Wilson's Wharf in May, where Black troops actually outnumbered white troops. And that was a Union victory. That was along the James River in Virginia, involving the 1st United States Colored Infantry, which was recruited in May 1863, 1st USCT Regiment, and the 10th USCI, a battery of white artillery, and a Union gunboat offshore against Confederate cavalry. Again, Union victory.
Mm-hmm. So in total, there were 26 African-American troops were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And also in 1865, there's another medal. I'll get onto that in a minute. So we're not going to go deep into this, but can you just give your view on this a little bit, if you wouldn't mind?
I think one of the big things is the story actually has, to me, something that needs to be retold, and that the first person, if you mention Black Civil War soldiers in the Medal of Honor, the name that comes up is the person there in the top right of your collage, which is William Carney. I believe there he's sporting either some kind of campaign medal or the Butler medal, I think, but not his Medal of Honor. But he was awarded his in the actual medal around 1900. He was the first to earn the medal with his actions at Second Fort Wagner, July 1863, when he recovered the colors and saved them from capture. He was shot several times, but he brought the flag back. This was after the withdrawal from attacking Fort Wagner, and let them know that the old flag never touched the ground. That's the legend, according to that.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't the first to receive his medal. Others received theirs before. You don't have a picture of him here, but Milton Holland is one when he was a young man. He was with the 5th United States Colored Troops. He received his as a young man. There are pictures of him as a young man with his medal. I think, I'm forgetting if that's Powhatan Beatty, just to William Carney's, to the left of William Carney that you have. But I believe that he has a Medal of Honor. He has 2, perhaps a Butler medal or something. But there's a few pictures of these Black soldiers that already got their medals. Christian Fleetwood is one who's not depicted here. And he has his Medal of Honor clearly displayed when he's still a soldier in the field. So there's a bunch of guys who got theirs, the actual physical medal, before William Carney, hadn't earned it until, didn't earn the medal until after Carney's actions, yes. But it wasn't just like that Carney was the first person to actually earn the medal and receive the medal. There were others who got it before him. He finally got his because of an exhibition, I think, some of those World's Fairs or whatever it was. And they wanted to do something like what you have, kind of a collage of Black soldiers, realize, hey, this man never even got the medal. I guess he didn't make that much of a fuss of it himself, and then petitioned for him to get it, and he was finally awarded his own Medal of Honor. Some of them, the originals of these soldiers, I guess, still do exist somewhere. Maybe they're owned by the family. Some others may have been buried with the soldiers too, and that's also, I think, typical of other white regiments as well, or other white soldiers as well.
And again, you did mention it, the Butler Medal, and I didn't know anything about the Butler Medal until you mentioned it to me when we was discussing putting this program together. So just give us a little bit of an overview of the Butler Medal, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, sure. The man there on the left is Benjamin Butler, who's from Massachusetts. He's one of the political generals of the Civil War. It's always said that he wasn't that great a general. I'm not going to get into that, but he was very, very politically astute. He really was kind of everywhere during the Civil War. He was in Baltimore after the Baltimore riot, just kind of restored order there. He was in, I think by May or June of 1861, he was at Fort Monroe, where there were a few Black men who made their way to Union soldiers, one of the first accounts of that. And he kind of set the precedent and coined the term contraband of war. Because he says basically, well, you claim that they're property, and we're, going to seize Confederate property. It's going to be, we're not going to have it used against us, people. So he said, we're going to claim these men as contraband of war. And besides, if you're claiming, well, they've got to go back to you, you say you're a foreign government now, right? I don't have to do what you say. So those men did receive their freedom and weren't returned as some other Union generals did, like I said before. Butler was also in New Orleans for the fall there, and there's people to this day who can't stand Butler because
a lot of the ladies, I believe, is that right?
Yeah, I mean the thing with the General Order Number 28, where he said that basically a woman, if she didn't disrespected Union soldiers, she'd be treated like a prostitute. I'm certainly not advocating sexual assault.
No, of course,
absolutely not. But I do understand that the harassment of his men stopped, and it was something that obviously upset Confederates a lot. I have unfortunately heard some anti-Semitic issues with General Butler. And it's again a case of people being very complicated. I'll just say that for the good things that Benjamin Butler did, he did some very good things during the war. I can't defend, horrible things he did or whatever, but the Butler Medal was privately minted, paid for by him, and over 200 of these were issued to Black soldiers. I think they were specifically for Black soldiers during the war. There were some other medals like the Kearney Cross, which came from, I think, Philip Kearney, and were issued privately, similar thing, and maybe somebody else's. But these were all paid for and designed and everything by Ben Butler, issued to Black soldiers. Someone I understand is working on a list of who all those 200 plus whatever were. I don't know, so I don't know where it is right now, but I'm hoping at some point someone will compile that and release that. That'd be great information to have.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, and it was issued, it was issued
right.
Starting with the Battle of Newmarket Heights in September 29th and 30th, 1864.
Okay. Right, okay, so that concludes our podcast. But have you got any final thoughts on the legacy of the USCT and what it achieved and what it did for the future?
I think there was a lot of thoughts with that. I know that someone wants to put all the soldiers of the United States colored troops, and I guess the Black Navy sailors, in for like a Congressional Gold Medal, I think. I think it'd be better to award it to individuals because, I don't know certainly if the deed of every Black soldier, was the best. I'm sure certainly among the USCT you had men who deserted, men who proved to be cowards, men, any of those things. And they're not pleasant to talk about, but they were just men like anybody else. I think, I know certainly there are many battles that Black soldiers were involved in that were defeats. I mentioned Ulusty earlier, Fort Pillow, the Crater, where Black soldiers were defeated. But I think the most important thing about the USCT is that they existed, that they were organized, just that they were there. And this picture showing something that nobody expected at the beginning of the war. Black men armed as soldiers, military bearing, in uniform. No one had planned for that. Beginning of the war, Simon Cameron, Secretary of War, turned down requests of 300 Black men to take up arms. And then you end with something like this. So I think it just, again, that alone, just that presence is a major United States victory, even without the battles or anything like that. Also, too, the service of the United States colored troops certainly goes beyond the battles. Garrison duty, guard duty, guarding prisoners, and such things. And then their service after the war ended in keeping the peace, and also along the southwest border with the troubles in Mexico with Napoleon III, in France and Mexico, that whole thing. I don't know a lot about it, but basically to keep any, thing, Mexican Revolution or whatever it was, but being sent to the Southwest to keep the peace there was so important. So they're a big part of United States victory, not the only part, certainly. Immigrants played a major part. The Veteran Reserve Corps, the use of disabled men as in a military capacity to do jobs other than being soldiers on the front line. The Sanitary Commission, the Christian Commission involving civilians, all these things were that bringing that one hand tied around the back to the front. None of those things planned for to achieve United States victory. So I think that they're definitely a huge part of that victory. Not the only part again, but a very important, significant, and honorable part in saving the Union, ending slavery, and laying the groundwork for the country that we have today.
Yeah. And all that's left to do is say thank you very much for joining me, Bryan. I really enjoyed listening to you talk. Just before I finish up, I want to say, obviously, in this podcast, some of the pictures that were described. If you are listening on the podcast and you want to see the pictures that go along with this podcast, please head over to the YouTube channel. But Bryan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Darren. It's always great to talk to you. And I really do appreciate the opportunity and just a chance to share. Thank you very much.
Cheers.